Okay, so let's continue onward, kind of building up a potential table from scratch. I do want to remind you, of course, you can always begin by just copying and pasting out things that we already have done in the demo. You know, for example, you didn't have to make a main ball from scratch. You could have just copied the one that's over here. And if you did try to do that, you might also notice that it's sometimes hard to select things inside of here that really just has to do with the layering of things. And, you know, for example, some pieces of artwork encompass basically the entire scene area, and they might be layered on top of something else, so you just kind of can't get to it. If that happens to you, it's very easy. Just try to keep track of the names that you give things, and if you remember them, you can just begin typing inside of here. And for example, I've got main ball, right? So put that in. I can select it over here, just hit return, and you can see then that you do have it selected. And another great way of moving things around, of course, you can just kind of click and drag those things. You can also hold down the shift key and use the directional arrows on the keyboard to kind of nudge things a little further. But you can also go over here, and you notice how my icon turns this like kind of little slider thing. You can do stuff like this too, and I find that that's one of the quickest ways to move things around. I often forget about it too, though. So let's go head back over here to the demo table that we created in the last getting started video, and we should put in here some table walls and lead up to basically making the plunger. So again, what I'm going to do is grab out a color sprite. I'm just going to put that onto the scene, and I'm going to use some of the assets that I've already imported, but you, at this point, can, of course, begin bringing in your own assets, just dropping them into here. If it's going to be a non-animated image, it's very simple to just drag it from your desktop, put it into here, and then you can use it as a texture in your scene. Now, keep in mind, this game assets catalog is shared among both iOS and tvOS, so anything you put in here is going to be, for both devices potentially. And all right, so now that I've got that sprite in there, what I'm going to do is just type in table, and you can see it's going to fill in table border for me. And I've now got a texture on that color sprite that sure enough looks like a table border, and you can see it extends over top of the main scene, which is fine. Most of the tables that I've designed all extend further up, beyond the scene height, and the camera will end up tracking that. Of course, we don't actually have a camera in the scene yet, but well, you know what? Might as well just throw it in there right now too. That's very easy. Anytime you put in a camera, so you drag it out here, it's always going to be the same exact size as the scene itself, and you'll notice that it's not dead center. If I do put it up here like kind of dead center, well, that's easy to just numerically punch into. 540, 960 is right in the middle. You'll notice then that the kind of yellow box representing the camera is exactly the same size of the scene. There's no way to change that, but you can alter the zoom and things like that. But I would just say leave all the cameras exactly the same. You have to leave them the same size as the scene, but don't worry about the zoom in the scene itself, because that's something you can set with the property list. And now we're going to call this the camera. All right, so your camera should always be named the camera. There you go. And what's cool too is you can also make GUI or labels, things like that, a child of the camera. So anywhere the camera goes, those are going to stay affixed to the actual camera. Okay, so let's go back to our table over here. A little digression. And one thing that you'll notice too is that I didn't give this a name, which I think is always a bad idea. And again, for the very reason that once your kind of table has a lot of things on it, you're going to want to be able to identify them with that name. But it also goes back to the property list too. So if we want to give this table object some specific properties, we're going to need to name it something a little bit better than SK Sprite Node. And in fact, what we could do is just call this wall, and you can have many different objects in the scene that share the same name, which also implies that they're going to share the same properties. So last little step here, and of course this is something you always have to do when you're going to make something that you want to interact with in the scene, is give it that custom class. In this case, this is going to be table object, because this is something that I do want the ball to collide with, and in kind of sprite kit terminology and in terms of the kit, you there's a difference between contacting something and colliding with something. The lights are something that you're going to contact with, but not actually collide with. Okay, that means that the ball can pass over them, under them, whatever. But table objects, you're going to contact and collide with. Okay, they can't share the same physical space. So if I were to go and grab the ball, okay, and move it over, let's say to like right over here, bring this up, and then heading back over here to my wall. If I did actually give it the physics body, which is another step that I too sometimes forget to do, go over here and give it this a physics body set to alpha mask, and you'll notice that when you do that, you get this little blue line edging around the shape itself. The ball will kind of run along the edge here before it descends on down, maybe hitting this and then going down into the drain. Of course, though, I don't want this physics body to just drop down with gravity, so I need to toggle off affected by gravity, allows rotation, and dynamic. I would say for most of the things that you include in the scene, that's what you're going to do. If it's a table object, toggle off all of those. But you don't necessarily have to. You could leave allows rotation on, but toggle off affected by gravity and dynamic. So that it could be something that the ball, when it collides with, it makes that object rotate, right? But it stays put, basically. And you can also pin things too, and that's kind of a little further way of making sure that they do stay in that place. So again, yeah, if we were to run this right now, and we might as well, let's see what happens. And that is exactly what happens. It just kicks off the little side there and goes on into the drain. Now, the code-wise, what's happening under the hood is, again, I mentioned this in the last video, the kit knows to kind of save the initial starting place as for the main ball, and that's where it's going to reset to. But there is another thing you can do. You can put in here an empty node and call this starting point. Now the ball is still going to begin over here, but then when it's reset, it's actually going to go back to this starting point. So let's run that one more time, and hopefully we will see that the ball ends up over there. And I think we missed, just it was fading in the first time the ball, going to roll down whatever here. But obviously now it is going back to that starting position. And this is most likely going to be, you're going to want to float this over somewhere around the, in the alley for the plunger. And speaking of, let's go ahead and put one more table wall inside of here. I do need to stop the running of it because there's a little sound that is included in there that'll just drive me crazy if I have to hear it over and over again. So let's put in here now table wall, and there we go. That's the guy I'm looking for. That is wall 1. And let's quickly go and get this guy set up with a physics body. So let's call this wall, and again, this can have the same name if you want as the other wall, which implies it's got the same properties over here. And let's go ahead and be sure it has a custom class of table object. Go back over here. Let's set the alpha mask, and yet again, turn all that off, and magically it becomes a wall. Let's look at the properties for that, though. So I'm going to fold up what we currently had. Again, we're inside of our demo table here. I'm going to go down to table objects. I'm going to unfold wall, and there really isn't much inside of here. It's got a sounds array, which is basically just containing 3 properties. Each one of them is a string, which just means that these are going to be alphanumeric. And what they do is they define the potential sounds that can play when the ball hits the wall. Okay, and randomizing sound was a very important thing for me in developing this kit. You can include an unlimited number of sounds inside of here, and what the kit is going to do is it's just going to pick out one at random. Okay, and these are not major sounds; they're just little nudges. Anything that the ball, any sound that the ball might make running against a wall. And there's another option in here that says play main ball roll sounds, and I have that actually set to no, but that's something you could set to yes. And any sounds that you define under here, under ball roll, okay, and again, this is an array that can contain an unlimited number of sounds. What would happen then is the kit would play one of those rolling sounds every time the ball hit the wall. And I kind of found that was a little bit too much of the ball rolling around, so I disabled that. And then another option you have over here is to define a sound key. And what this does is it prevents the kit from overplaying the sound for this particular sound. Okay, so whatever key you put in here, if something in the code triggers that same sound with the same sound key, I should say, to play again, if one is already playing, it's not gonna overplay it. Okay, but if you are okay with as many wall sounds running at once as might happen, then just delete out that key, right? Okay, so back over here to our demo table. We've now got 2 walls inside of here, and I should mention that there's nothing fancy about this artwork at all that is making up our table walls at this point. It's just any old image that it has transparent data for the part that you're not seeing over here. So let's go ahead and just take a look at that artwork. I'm going to go over here into the game assets catalog, and at any time if you want to kind of find your artwork, you can always right click and go to show and finder, and you can see where that artwork is. If you were to unfold this, you can kind of follow the breadcrumb of where Xcode actually stores all of this stuff. And let's just open up the table border. And again, as I mentioned just a moment ago, this is nothing fancy. There's just no data inside of here. This is not actually black. It's just transparent pixels. So let's see, if you were to go over here to preview, preferences, here we go, window background. This will give you a little bit of a better idea of there it is. So there's no data over here, and that's how the Xcode determines the alpha mask for the body, because it goes, well, there's no pixel data over here, so I'm just going to make that body be everything that is around over here. The only issue that you'd come into with that alpha mask is if you did have some pixel data just like floating as a little island over here and then other artwork around it. It really can't handle that. It has to be basically a continuous piece of artwork, and obviously that's why we have 2 separate pieces for what's going on over here, our kind of main border, and then this wall right here, because obviously if I try to include that all in as one piece of artwork, it's just going to go, nope, I can't handle it. too much to think about. So you are going to separate pieces like this into their own little image and then assemble them together. So this is completely up to you, but I prefer to have the walls at a much higher Z depth or Z position. Now the ball should never be able to occupy the same space as these walls, although if you do include in a lot of ramps and things like that, every once in a while you get some sort of strange glitch where a ball can essentially go off the ramp and fall on top of one of these walls. Hey, it can happen in a real pinball table. It can happen here too. But I prefer to have the walls at a higher Z depth than the ball itself. So if you notice my main ball over here, it has a Z depth of 0, although code-wise what happens is it gets forced to a Z depth of 1 when the kit initially launches. And then there's certain properties you can add in that will make objects toggle above or below the ball depending on their position to kind of give it a little pseudo 3D effect. Mostly it's the bumpers I would do that with. Long story short, what I'm getting at here is I would put the walls at a significantly higher amount, something like maybe 100, and that way you can kind of remember in your own head, okay, these guys are at 100. I've got plenty of potential layers between where the ball is at and where the wall is at to put in other things. And then I do something similar for the table floor. So I'm going to just pull out here another sprite kit node. We'll call this floor. The texture in here, I believe, is table floor. There it is. And this is not something that the ball needs to ever register a contact with, at least in my tables. It doesn't need to. So I don't need to go over here and give it a custom class. It is just a piece of artwork. And I don't need to give it a physics body either. All I need to do, though, is arrange it. And I'm going to put this at a significantly lower Z depth. So that's going to be at -100. And if you're kind of familiar with Photoshop but not familiar with the term Z-depth, it's really just a bottommost layer inside of there. And you can kind of get an idea of how you can make this have some significant dimension, just sort of a little bit of an illusion here. By my table floor actually includes the the side of the walls over here and things like that, so that when it's all kind of piled up together, it should seem like you have a little bit of a three-dimensional angle on top of that. And I think I have it a little bit too high. I'm going to move it down just a tad. Oh, that's the wall. There you go. Yes, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. Okay, so there you go. That should give you an idea of how to set up your walls. And if you want to just kind of play around and do the same thing on your own, grab some more color sprites, and you'll notice that if you type in here table wall, there's quite a few of them, and you can figure out exactly where they should go. For example, this one is the wall for over there. And again, if you do want to kind of test yourself, give them a name, give them a physics body, and don't forget that important custom class, or it just won't do what you expect.